We're going to continue our series this morning on the book of Exodus, a series that I call The Biblical Moses That Hollywood Forgot, based on my book of the same name, TM. Let's review that which we experienced last week. Previously, in Exodus, the biblical Moses that Hollywood forgot, this is what we left with. We saw the battle of the gods, round one. The Lord says, "Say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you also with an outstretched arm and with great judgments." In this passage, 6 through 8, we see the 7 I wills that God promises the Jewish people, forever commemorated in our Passover Seder with the 4 cups. And again, I'll remind you from last week, although there's 7 promises, 7 I wills, I'm glad the rabbis had the insight to stop at 4. When it comes to cups of wine. So I will deliver you, I will bring you out, and I will redeem you. 1, 2, and 3. And I will take you for my people. And I will be your God. Language that a husband uses for his bride. I will take you for my wife. I will take you for my people. It's very clear the symbolism that's going on in this level of communication, that God is not treating this people like any other people, but as his own precious possession. He says, I will take you and I will be your God. We will enter into a relationship of intimacy. Linguistically, can only be compared to illustrations like a husband and wife later on, like a son to his firstborn. Those same illustrations are used. Is I am the Lord your God. You will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And what we see here, remember the question weeks ago, the central question of this text, Exodus. Who is the Lord, covenant name of God? Who is Jehovah? Who is Adonai? Who is this covenant God? Pharaoh asked the question. The rest of the passage, the rest of the text, period, the narrative, is dedicated to answering that very simple question. Who is Jehovah? And here we have an I am Jehovah sandwich. He begins this series of 7 I wills is sandwiched between opening with I am the Lord and I am the Lord. I am Jehovah. I am Jehovah. So, if you will, we have what we saw last week was a Jehovah sandwich, right? And you get a piece of bread that says I am Jehovah. A piece of bread over here. I am Jehovah. See. Highfalutin theologians, we call this an inclusio, means it begins and ends the same way, but I think of it as a sandwich. And the contents of that rich and thick piled high sandwich is 7 layers of God's intimate promises of his people. So that if you're not sure who the Lord is, well, by the time he's finished sharing the sandwich, there's no question for Israel, and there's no question for the readers that you know. If Pharaoh doesn't know, tough stuff on him. But you know who the Lord is. I will bring you to the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. That is the bottom piece of bread. In verse 8. We move on to the battle of the gods, round 2. Ding, ding. And we see in chapter 7, God's commandment. This is where we end it and we'll pick it up. You shall speak all that I command you, Moses, and your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh, that he let the sons of Israel go out of his land. But I will harden, I will strengthen Pharaoh's heart. I will give him backbone, in other words, that I may multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. He will not buckle under the pressure that I will bring to bear very easily. I will have to strengthen his backbone, and he will be able to bear and will do his heart's desire, which is to keep you enslaved. When Pharaoh does not listen to you, then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring out my hosts, my armies, my people, the sons of Israel, from the land of Egypt by great judgments. We're about to see what those are in our passage today. The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand on Egypt and bring out the sons of Israel from their midst. So once again, I want to emphasize that throughout the narrative, God is not just concerned with the Jewish people. He's not just concerned with Israel. God, at the same time that he's obviously very concerned about Israel, he is very careful throughout his pronouncements in the text to reveal that he is also very concerned with the Egyptians, and that they too know who he is. And that could be for their blessing if they would respond correctly in how they treat his people. Or it could be to further their judgment. But nonetheless, whether they know him as a God who blesses or a God who judges, and I've read the book, I see how it works, it's going to be judgments. And I saw the movie. They will know that he is the God of gods. He is the true, incomparable God. So when we think about what God wants, he's concerned with how his reputation is playing out on the Egyptian street. He's concerned about, not just Pharaoh at the top. It's not just an interaction between battle of the gods, Jehovah versus Pharaoh. It's a matter of what's going to happen to the Egyptian people as well, whom God obviously has a heart. Verse 6 tells us that Moses and Aaron did it as the Lord commanded them. Thus they did. So doing it, they did it, is how the Hebrew. Doing it, they did it, or they done it as the Lord commanded. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. Now that seems to be a statement of age that just pops up apropos of nothing, contextually separated from everything else. But contextually, when you think about who Moses is at this point, 2/3 of his life, and Aaron, 2/3 of their lives have gone by already. There has just been preparation. Why isn't there more text in Exodus that tells us about the backgrounds of Aaron or the history and the biography of Moses? Why was it left to Cecil B. DeMille and Hollywood to fill in the biographical details of Moses' life? Well, because what Moses is saying here is that past is prologue, not that important. Got the details, rescued from a program of Genesis, floating in the basket, adopted as an Egyptian prince, but identifying as a Hebrew, 40 years in the wilderness, and he comes back and he does that which really counts in his life. And I think before we continue, I think it's a good lesson for all of us who reach a certain age and say, well, I have accomplished at this stage of my life and in retirement or near retirement, I've accomplished the greatest things that I'm going to accomplish in my life. In a sense, the biography's recipe is already set. The cake is cooked. And now all that's left is just waiting out the clock for what comes next. But this is a passage that I think tells all of us, whether we're young or somewhere in the middle or a seasoned citizen, that sometimes the most significant thing that you are designed and given by God to do will only happen in the final third of your life. And all that you've done, and Moses is no slouch at this point, raised as an Egyptian prince. All that you've done, whatever you've accomplished, up to that final third, not as important. It's just prologue to what comes compared to what's coming next. I find that very encouraging. I'm not looking as I get older. I'm not looking as to how I can slide for home. I am looking for my marching orders. What's next? I've built quite a resume, and so have you all. For men and women of a certain age with the resumes, the life resumes that you've built up, the question is, what has God got next for you? The best, the greatest may yet be on its way. Well, that was just thrown in a little extra for nothing, no extra charge. Let's get back to the text. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. All right, didn't he just spoke to? Yeah, okay, well he speaks to them again. I see we're going to see that a lot in the passage. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, when Pharaoh speaks to you, saying, work a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before your rod, in other words. Not your secretary and assistants, but take your rod and throw it down before Pharaoh that it may become a serpent. And we saw that in the film last week as well, done so beautifully, so wonderfully as only Hollywood can. So Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh does indeed challenge the brothers to publicly show a miracle. And as Moses had done, so now Aaron does. He casts down his staff. Aaron threw his staff down before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. Pharaoh also called for the wise men and the sorcerers, and they also. In other words, he calls for the magicians of Egypt. They do the same with their secret arts. I mentioned last week that this is still something that can be done by taking a serpent, putting your finger, your thumb on a particular nerve on that serpent. It stiffens up like so, and then you throw it down, and it lands on the ground. It's shocked into away, and obviously it's a snake. When you go to pick it up again, you press down, pressure once again on that nerve. The serpent stiffens up, and so this can be done. Although it's unclear whether they're doing it using that particular way of doing it, as can be done today, or if they're actually using real secret arts, right? In fact, it says they're doing the same with their secret arts. By the way, Jewish tradition records the names of two of the magicians who opposed Moses. Anybody know those names? Jannes and Jambres, right? And they actually, although they're not mentioned here in Exodus, they are mentioned in 2 Timothy 3 by Paul. So Jewish tradition is recognized, of course, by Paul. Jannes and Jambres, their impressive deeds come through history as well in the Jewish mind. But in this supernatural power encounter between God and the Egyptian deities, the superiority of the Lord is demonstrated when, well, let's see what happens. For each threw down his staff and they turned into serpents, but Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Never seen that one before, Jannes or Jambres, right? And verse 13 tells us that yet Pharaoh's heart was hardened. And he did not listen to them as the Lord had said. Now the agency of heart hardening, in other words, who hardened Pharaoh's heart here? Ambiguous, I think probably best understood as Pharaoh not needing any help from the Lord to give him more backbone. I think Pharaoh has his own strengthening moment here, and he hardens his own heart at this point again. And he did not listen as the Lord had said. But now we move to the next section of the narrative. We go from round 1 and round 2, Battle of the Gods, preliminary opening rounds. And we go to where it gets really exciting, and that is the plagues. 10 of them, of course. While the Lord could have delivered the Hebrews from Egypt with one powerful and dramatic act, and we all can agree on that, yeah? Nonetheless, interesting, I think, he chose to prolong the process. Doesn't just do once, pull the Band-Aid off, one big giant. No. There's a process that the Hebrews witness and that the Egyptians experience. It's a series of 10 plagues. And those 10 plagues are delivered over an approximate period of between 6 and 9 months. Spans late summer, early fall, 1445 BC, through the spring of 1446 BC, all the way through Passover of the year 1446. And with each plague, the intensity of God's judgment on Egypt escalates, it ratchets up, and there is a marked increase in the people's suffering and of the devastation in the land of Egypt itself. Now, when we think, let's just see what the text says. The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is stubborn. He refuses to let the people go. No kidding. And so we come to these plagues, and there are 4 divine purposes to the plagues. They serve 4 divine purposes. The first, most obvious purpose for the plagues was to compel Pharaoh to release the Hebrews from bondage. So reason number 1, God's number 1 purpose for these devastating set of 10 plagues is to compel Pharaoh to release the Hebrews from bondage. The second reason is to punish the Egyptians for their harsh treatment of the Hebrew slaves. And so, reason number 2, divine purpose number 2, for the Egyptians to receive justice. Justice will be dispensed. Reason number 3, a demonstration of God's power and authority. You know, when we think about these first 3 divine purposes, once again we go back to the Abrahamic covenant. You see, I have there on the slide the reference on the second divine purpose for the Egyptians to receive justice. Justice as determined by whom? Justice in relation to what? As measured by what? And it is measured against the Abrahamic covenant. I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you, I too will curse. It is retributive justice, and it is measured out directly against how the Jewish people have been treated. So this nation, which has at first had blessed the Jewish people with Joseph and bringing the Jewish people in and giving them a place to live and to thrive and to grow. Eventually a dynastic turn occurs where they then become despicably treated. A program of genocide breaks out, and they are enslaved. And so, if you treat the apple of God's eye, if you treat God's chosen people, if you treat those for whom God said, I will take you as my people, and I will be your God, a very special covenantal way. He is Jehovah, after all. If you're going to treat his people that way, you're going to have to deal with his justice in proportion to how you treated the Hebrews. So no one, in other words, can then come away after reading the events of the plagues, the description of the plagues, and the devastation of the people, the animals, the land, of course, all the deaths that occur in the 10th plague. No one can say, God is a petty God. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is a vengeful God, is a unjust God. He's so vengeful, so mean-spirited. Who can serve a God like this? God is simply meting out, measure for measure, the justice that is due the Egyptian people for how they treated his people. Plain and simple. And the warning is in writing. Genesis 12, verses 3, part A, first part of the verse. Okay, clause A. Final reason, and this, I get a kick out of this myself, with each plague, we see a demonstration of the Lord's superiority over Egypt's voluminous number of false gods. There were some 80 ancient Egyptian gods, and each Egyptian god is the personification of some animal or some object, and we'll talk about them with each plague. And in addition, of course, Pharaoh himself, considered to be a living incarnation of the god Horus, and the court magicians serving as the priests of this god, this man-god, God-man, Horus. Not Horus, but Horus. And not Horus either, okay, but Horus. And each of the 10 plagues is specifically designed to challenge a specific god, or in most cases, series of gods within the Egyptian pantheon. And ultimately, the plagues are designed to topple the credibility of Pharaoh's own divinity as well. It's got this big bubble of divinity he's walking around in, and God is going to take his divine needle and go pop. Right? Pop goes the divinity. The plagues are also divinely ordered. There is an order to the plagues. If we think of the 10th plague as like the grand finale, you know how like when we see fireworks, at 4th of July, there's always like, you wait, you watch, ooh, you're impressed, but then you're waiting, right? And there's always going to be this grand finale where all the stops are taken out and just boom, you're really impressed. And the final plague, of course, is this grand finale. So that if we take those first 9 plagues, we can divide them into 3 sets of 3 plagues each. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now, within each one of those sets, there is a specific order. So if we take 1 and 2, which is from set 1, and you take the first 2 of the second set, 4 and 5, and then the first 2 of the third set, 7 and 8. So plague 1 and 2, plague 4 and 5, plague 7 and 8. They are all, in other words, this initial pair is always introduced with a warning, a specific warning. And then if we take subsets of that first set of plagues, so 1 and 2, 4 and 5, 7 and 8, the first of each set of plagues that are introduced with a warning, they are a warning given in the morning. So you have them broken up in pairs, right? So sets of 3, first pair, second pair, third pair, and then within those pairs, the first one is always going to be a warning in the morning. So 1, 4, and 7, a warning in the morning, and then the third, lest we forget, there's a third plague in each one of the three sets. So we've dealt with the first set of pairs, right? Then we have the third. So in other words, plague number 3, plague number 6, plague number 9. These all arrive without warning. Okay? There's no warning whatsoever. In the morning, in the evening, in the mid-afternoon, there's no warning. So, does it make sense? So it's wonderful to see how God does. There's patterns to see. There is a systematic approach that God takes. So when you divide your plagues, instead of just 10 plagues, boom, 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 in a serial fashion, they're getting worse, they're getting worse, they're getting worse. It's awful. God has arranged them in subsets so that they would begin with warning. The first 2 of each set begin with a warning. And the middle one of each set begins, the first one of each set actually begins in the morning. So you start your plague set out with a warning in the morning. So, and then of course, the third one of each of the 3 without warning arrives. And then you have the grand finale. So before we delve into this section, let us pause for a second to mentally consider that this is not just math, this is not just design, this is actual human suffering that resulted in something absolutely magnificent. And the hand of God was seen intervening in the course of human history in a very specific and a very well-designed fashion. All right. Selah, in other words. Now, these are, well, they were so kind to line up like this. Just a few of the Egyptian gods. This is that one Horus that I had mentioned. This is the one that Pharaoh is the incarnation of, okay? And then you have this guy, Set, we'll see him. And Khnum, I like him. He looks like a ram. Hathor, generally Hathor is a cow, but she looks pretty good. And then Sobek has the crocodile head, gotta like that. Ra and Ammon and Ptah, not to be confused with his brother Ptu. And then Anubis and Osiris and Isis. And, well, the list goes on and on. Let's read the passage. Here's the warning in the morning that Pharaoh will receive, and he'll continue to refuse to let the Hebrews go. So, go to the Pharaoh in the morning as he's going out to the water, and station yourself to meet him on the bank of the Nile, the specific water that he's going out to in the morning. And you shall take in your hand the staff that was turned into a serpent. You shall say to him, the Lord, Jehovah, in other words, the covenant name of God, Adonai. The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, let my people go. Not that they may go free. Not that they can have their freedom. Again, minimal request, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But behold, you have not listened until now. Thus says the Lord, Jehovah, the covenant God. By this you shall know that I am the Lord. There's that phrase again, that I am Jehovah. The question that Pharaoh asked chapters ago, who is the Lord? I do not know him. He's not one of my 80 of my gods. I don't know him, and I don't care to know him. This is God saying, allow me to introduce myself to you. By this you shall know that I am the Lord. How do you do? I am Jehovah. Behold, I will strike the water that is in the Nile with the staff that is in my hand, and it will be turned to blood. The fish that are in the Nile will die, and the Nile will become foul, and the Egyptians will find difficulty in drinking water from the Nile. And how? That's in the original Hebrew. Then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their rivers, over their streams, and over their pools, and over all their reservoirs of water. Rather comprehensive list. That they may become blood, and there will be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. Pharaoh did not favorably respond to even this minimal request, and so the first plague will be unleashed, this turning the water of Nile into blood. So Moses and Aaron did even as the Lord had commanded. He lifted up the staff, and he struck the water that was in the Nile in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, and all the water that was in the Nile was turned to blood. Not some of the water, not most of the water, all of the water that was in the Nile was turned to blood. The fish that were in the Nile died, and the Nile became foul, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile, and the blood was throughout all the land of Egypt. This now completely crimson water stank with an inundation of dead fish, proving, of course, to be undrinkable. And the magnitude of the sign's effect was extended not merely to bodies of water, but to every vessel, stone, wood, well, every vessel that already contained drinking water. I love this particular scene in the Ten Commandments, which I'm not going to show you today. I'm going to show you a different scene. But in the Ten Commandments, that was familiar to most of us, you have this wonderful scene where the waters turn to blood, and Pharaoh's like, yeah, okay, I'm still Pharaoh. And he takes from his priests, he takes a vase, a vessel of water, and he raises it, and he prays to his God that it remain water and pure, and in fact that water will then purify the blood and turn the blood back into water. And you see Yul Brynner pouring the water out, and then the water that's coming out turns to blood, and he, in horror, drops the vessel and doesn't know what to do. It's a wonderful scene. You're not going to see it now. But the point of this is that they shall know I am the Lord. Again, to demonstrate the Lord's superiority over Pharaoh and his gods. The Nile River was considered sacred. We're going to talk about which gods get affected as soon as we see this passage. Now, I do want to warn you that the first 45 seconds of this passage are fairly intense, and if you get a little squeamish about violence, you might want to avert your only for the first 45 seconds, and then you can look up. We'll tell you when it's all over. But this comes from the film that was released 3 years ago, Exodus, Gods and Kings. You remember that one where Moses is played by Batman, right? So let's watch that video. I like this clip. I like this clip because it really shows in a very realistic fashion what a river turned to blood would actually look like. And you see the fish dead in the water, and you see the stink and how truly polluted everything is. They attempt to make it realistic, as if the plagues could ever be, explained by nature. But they try and say, well, instead of just some inexorable or inexplicable spreading it into blood, what if all the crocodiles in all the land of Egypt all get together for a big convention, and turn not only on the humans but turn on one another, and then of course something's wrong with the fish because they're bleeding as well, and they're dead. So it's a kind of a combo. It's a hybrid presentation that Hollywood has done here, in attempting to, on the one hand, explain something in somewhat of a naturalistic fashion, but on the other hand, well, what is the cause of this naturalistic fashion? What is the reason that things got this way? And we have a divine answer. So the movie, in a sense, tries to have its cake and eat it too. But the magicians of Egypt, and we saw this in the film, represented. The magicians of Egypt, they are able to actually do the same with their secret arts. They can't undo it, but they can turn the water into blood. They can't undo the blood and make it into water, but they can turn whatever's water's left, they can find the pure water, and they can say, look, Pharaoh, we can do it too. So the question that I always have is not by what means they were able to turn the fresh water into blood, most likely the demonic, but what would have possessed them, most likely the demonic, to have wasted the precious resource of water simply to demonstrate that their God was equal to match the power of Jehovah on this. So they kind of, look, see, we can do it too, but now we have absolutely no water at all. Oops. But the miraculous there's a miraculous intensification theory, and you may have heard. Some of you may actually hold to that. Some of you watching at home may hold to this as well. Mysterious, miraculous intensifications of natural events. For example, the initial plague. If it wasn't crocodiles, it could have resulted from large quantities of red sediment, from algae, fungus. We've got something going on right now on the west coast of Florida called the red tide, but causing the water to take on the appearance of blood. This is, it's sure it's possible. So with crocodiles, it's possible, but it's unlikely because this and other similar theories don't explain the immediate transformation of all the water, including that which is already inside pools stored in containers of stone, etc., etc. There is a toxic period that they're going to go through, a toxic period of 7 days. And just as the Hebrews had to gather their own straw for bricks, so too the Egyptians are going to have to dig for water around the Nile. Pharaoh turned and went to his house with no concern even for this. So the Egyptians dug around the Nile for water to drink. They could not drink the water of the Nile. 7 days passed after the Lord had struck the Nile. The gods that were shown up by this are the gods Osiris, the very bloodstream. The Nile River is his bloodstream, the Osiris. Well, I guess it really looks like now a bloodstream, old Osiris. Osiris, by the way, is the Irish Egyptian god. And then you have, you'll think about it later, you get it, or maybe not. Then you have Khnum, who I always enjoy. Khnum, the guardian of the Nile, looks like a ram. And then you have the spirit of the Nile, Hapi or Hapi. And of course, for this movie, Sebek, the crocodile god, very important. We're going to stop right there. We're going to pause our series now and enjoy communion with one another. Before I bring Scott up here, I want us to say, okay, well, Steve, how thematically connected for you to go from turning the river of Nile into blood to the blood of our Messiah, the representation of the blood of our Messiah. That blood caused death and suffering. The symbolic blood of our Messiah that we're about to partake of in communion now is blood that eases suffering, not causes suffering. Blood that brings not death, but brings life. Eternal life that begins not pie in the sky by and by, but begins right now, if we would but exercise our trust in the Messiah, if we will simply put our trust in who the Messiah is. And it is this symbolic blood that reminds us of the blood of our Messiah that ratified, not the Mosaic covenant, but the new covenant, the superior replacement that guarantees us the promise that all of us, whether we're Jewish or Gentile, all of us will be the people of God if we put our trust in his Son, and that he will be our God. We will be his people. He will be our God. And all of us will know him, from the greatest to the least, because his laws will be not written on stone tablets, but the laws of God through the new covenant, through the blood of our Messiah, they are written on our hearts.